All right, we're going to be reading the story of Joseph in Genesis 37. This is called Joseph in Egypt. Let me just make sure it's going. Cool. All right, Genesis 37, verse 1. So Jacob lived in Canaan, the country in which his father had settled. And this is the story of the descendants of Jacob. When Joseph was a boy of 17, he used to accompany his brothers, the sons of Bela and Zippah, his father's wives, flock. And he brought their father a bad report of them. Now, Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was a child of his old age, and he made a long-sleeved robe. Now that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and they could not say a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him still more. He said to them, "Listen to the dream I've had. We were in a field binding sheaves, when my sheaf rose on end and stood upright, and your sheaves gathered round and bowed low before my sheaf." His brother answered to him, "Do you think you will one day be a king and lord over us?" And they hated him still more because of his dreams and what he said. He had another dream, which he told his father and his brothers. He said, "Listen, I have had another dream. The sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told it to his father and his brothers, his father took him to task. "What is this dream of yours?" he said. "Must we come and bow low to the ground before you, I and your mother and your brothers?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father did not forget. Joseph's brothers went to mind their father's flock in Shechem. Israel said to him, "Your brothers are minding the flocks in Shechem. Come, I will send you to them." And he said, "I am ready." He said to him, "Go and see if all is well with your brothers and the sheep, and bring me back your word." So he sent off Joseph from the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. A man met him wandering in the open country and asked him what he was looking for. He replied, "I am looking for my brothers. Please tell me where they are minding the flocks." The man said, "They have gone away from here. I have heard them speaking of going to Dothan." So Joseph followed his brothers, and he found them in Dothan. They saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. They said to each other, "Here comes that dreamer. Now is our chance. Let us kill him and throw him into one of these pits, and say that a wild beast has devoured him. Then we shall see what will come of his dreams." When Reuben heard, he came to his rescue, urging them not to take his life. "Let us have no bloodshed," he said. "Throw him in this pit in the wilderness, but do him no bodily harm." He meant to save him from them, so as to restore him to his father. When Joseph came up to his brothers, they stripped him of the long-sleeved robe which he was wearing, took him, and threw him into the pit. The pit was empty and had no water in it. Then they sat down to eat some food, and looking up, they saw an Ishmaelite caravan coming in from Gilead on the way down to Egypt, with camels carrying gum, tagacanth, and balm and myrrh. Judah said to his brothers, "What shall we gain by killing our brother and concealing his death? Why not sell him to the Ishmaelites?" Why not sell him to the Ishmaelites? Let us do him no harm, for he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed with him. Meanwhile, some Midianite merchants passed by and drew Joseph up out of the pit. They sold him for 20 pieces of silver to the Ishmaelites, and when they brought Joseph to Egypt. When Reuben went back to the pit, Joseph was not there. He rent his clothes and went back to his brothers and said, "The boy is not there. Where can I go?" Joseph's brothers took his robe, killed the goat, and dripped it in the goat's blood. Then they tore the robe, the long-sleeved robe, brought it to their father and said, "Look what we have found. Do you not recognize it? Is this your son's robe or not?" Jacob did recognize it, and he said, "This is my son's robe. A wild beast has devoured him. Joseph has been torn to pieces." Jacob rent his clothes, put on soaksack, and mourned his son for a long time. His sons and daughters all tried to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. He said, "I will go to my grave mourning for my son." Thus Joseph's father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of the Pharaoh's eunuchs, the captain of the guard. That is the end of chapter 37. Next, we're going to skip ahead to chapter 39, so skip 38. I'll give you a second to answer any questions you may have. All right. Genesis chapter 39, verse 1. When Joseph was taken down to Egypt, he was bought by Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's eunuchs, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian. Potiphar had bought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered. He lived in the house of his Egyptian master, who saw that the Lord was with him and was giving him success in all that he undertook. Thus, Joseph found favor with his master, and he became his personal servant. Indeed, his master put him in charge of his household and entrusted him with all that he had. From the time that he put him in charge of his household and all his property, the Lord blessed the Egyptian household for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that was in the house and field. He left everything he possessed in Joseph's care, and he concerned him with nothing but the food he ate. Now Joseph was handsome and good-looking, and a time came when his master's wife took notice of him and said, "Come and lie with me." But he refused and said to her, "Think of my master. He does not know as much as I do about his own house, and he has entrusted me with all that he has. He has given me authority in this house, second only to his own, and has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How can I do anything so wicked and sin against God?" She kept asking Joseph day after day, but he refused to lie with her and be in her company. One day he came into the house as usual to do his work, when none of the other men in the household were there indoors. She caught him by the cloak, saying, "Come and lie with me." But he left the cloak in her hands and ran out of the house. When she saw that he had left his cloak in her hands and had run out of the house, she called out to the men of the household, "Look at this. My husband has brought in a Hebrew to make a mockery of us. He came in here to lie with me, but I gave a loud scream. When he heard me scream and call out, he left his cloak in my hand and ran off with her until his master came home, and she repeated her tale. She said, 'That Hebrew slave whom you have brought in to make a mockery of me.' But when I screamed for help and called out, he left his cloak in my hands and ran off. When Joseph's master heard his wife's story of what his slave had done to her, he was furious. He took Joseph and put him in the round tower, where the king's prisoners were kept. And there he stayed in the round tower. But the Lord was with Joseph and kept faith with him, so that he won the favor of the governor of the round tower. He put Joseph in charge of all the prisoners in the tower and all of their work. He ceased to concern himself with anything entrusted to Joseph, because the Lord was with Joseph and gave him success in everything. It happened later that the king's butler and his baker offended the master of the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry. I'll go back. The Lord was with Joseph and gave him success and everything. That's the end of chapter 39. So if you have any questions that you can answer about chapter 39, you should do that now. And then we're going to go into chapter 40, which I started a little bit, but not very much. So I'll give you a second. All right, Genesis chapter 40, verse 1. It happened later that the king's butler and his baker offended their master, the king of Egypt. Pharaoh was angry with the two eunuchs, the chief butler and the chief baker, and he put them in custody of the house of the captain of the guard in the round tower where Joseph was imprisoned. The captain of the guard The captain of the guard appointed Joseph as their attendant, and he waited on them. One night, when they had been in prison for some time, they both had dreams, each needing its own interpretation. Butler and his baker were imprisoned in the round tower. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw they looked dejected. So he asked these eunuchs who they were in custody with in their master's house, why they were so downcast that day. They replied, "We have each had a dream, and there is no one to interpret it for us." Joseph said, "Does not interpretations belong to God? Tell me your dreams." Joseph his dreams. "In my dream," he said, "there was a vine in front of me. On the vine there were 3 branches, and as soon as it budded, it blossomed, and all clusters ripened into grapes. Now I had Pharaoh's cup in my hands, and I plucked the grapes, crushed them into Pharaoh's cup, and put the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph said to him, "This is the interpretation. The 3 branches are 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will raise you and restore you to your post, and then you will put your cup into Pharaoh's hand as you used to do when you were his butler. But when things go well with you, if you think of me, keep faith with me and bring my case to Pharaoh's notice and help me get out of this house. By force I was carried off from the land of the Hebrews, and I have done nothing here to deserve being put in this dungeon." When the chief baker saw that Joseph had given a favorable interpretation, he said to him, "I too had a dream, and in my dream there were 3 baskets of white bread on my head. In the top basket there was every kind of food which the baker prepares for Pharaoh, and the birds were eating off the top basket on my head." Joseph answered, "This is my interpretation. 3 baskets are the 3 days. Within 3 days, Pharaoh will raise you and hang you up on a tree, and the birds of the air will eat your flesh." The 3rd day was Pharaoh's birthday, and he gave a feast for all his servants. He raised the chief butler and the baker in the presence of the court. He restored the chief butler to his post, and the butler put his cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker. All went as Joseph had said in interpreting the dreams for them. Even so, the chief butler did not remember Joseph, but forgot him. Nearly 2 years later, Joseph had a dream. He was standing by the Nile, and there came up from the river 7 cows, sleek and fat, and they grazed on the reeds. After them, 7 other cows came up from the river, gaunt and lean, and stood on the riverbank beside the first cows. The cows that were gaunt and lean devoured the cows that were sleek and fat. Then Pharaoh woke up. He fell again asleep and had a second dream. He saw 7 ears of corn, full and ripe, growing on the stalk. Growing up after them were 7 other ears, thin and shriveled by the east wind. The thin ears swallowed up the ears that were full and ripe. Then the Pharaoh woke up and knew it was a dream. When morning came, Pharaoh was troubled in mind, so he summoned all the magicians and sages of Egypt. He told them his dream, but there was no one who could interpret it for him. Then Pharaoh's chief butler spoke up and said, "It is time for me to recall my faults." Once Pharaoh was angry with his servants, and he imprisoned me and the chief baker in the house of the captain of the guard. One night we both had dreams, each needing its own interpretation. We had with us a young Hebrew slave of the captain of the guard, and we told him our dreams, and he interpreted them for us, giving each man's dream its own interpretation. Each dream came true as it had been interpreted to us. I was restored to my position, and he was hanged. Pharaoh thereupon sent for Joseph, and they hurriedly brought him out of the dungeon. He shaved and changed his clothes, and came into the Pharaoh and said to him, "I have had a dream, and no one can interpret it but me. I have heard it that you can understand and interpret dreams." Joseph said, "Not I, but God." Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "In my dream I was standing on the bank of the Nile, and there came up from the river 7 cows, fat and sleek, and they grazed on the reeds. After them 7 other cows came up that were poor, very gaunt and lean. I have never seen such gaunt creatures in all of Egypt. These lean, gaunt cows devoured the first cows, the fat ones. They were swallowed up, but no one could have guessed that they were in the bellies of the other, which looked as gaunt as before." Then I woke up. After I had fallen asleep again, I saw in a dream 7 ears of corn, full and ripe, growing on one stalk. Growing up after them were 7 other ears, shriveled, thin, and blighted by the east wind. The thin ears swallowed up the ripe ears. When I told all the magicians, no one could explain this to me. Joseph said to Pharaoh, "Pharaoh's dreams are one dream. God has told Pharaoh what he is going to do. The 7 cows are 7 years, and the 7 good ears of corn are 7 years. It is all one dream. The 7 lean and gaunt cows that came up after them are 7 years, and the empty ears of corn blighted by the east wind will be 7 years of famine. It is as I said to Pharaoh. God has let Pharaoh see what he was going to do. There are going to be 7 years of great plenty throughout the land. After them will come 7 years of famine. All of the years of plenty in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ruin the country. The good years will not be remembered in the land because of the famine that follows. It will be very severe. The doubling of Pharaoh's dream means that God has already resolved to do this, and he will soon put it into effect. Pharaoh should now look for a shrewd and intelligent man and put him in charge of the country. This is what Pharaoh should do: appoint controllers over the land and take 1/5 of the produce of Egypt during the 7 years of plenty. They should collect all this food produced in the good years that are coming and put corn under Pharaoh's control in the store of the cities and keep it under guard. This food will be a reserve for the country against the 7 years of famine which will come upon Egypt. Thus, the country will not be devastated by famine. Pharaoh and all of his quarters, and he said to them, "Can we find a man like this, one who has the Spirit of God in him?" He said to Joseph, "Since a God has made all this known to you, there is no one so shrewd and intelligent as you. You shall be in charge of my household, and all my people will depend on your every word. Only my royal throne shall make me greater than you." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I hereby give you authority over the whole land of Egypt." He took off his signet ring and put it on Joseph's finger. He had dressed in front of the fine linen and hung a gold chain around his neck. He mounted him in the viceroy's chariot, and men cried, "Make way before him." Thus Pharaoh made him ruler over all of Egypt and said to him, "I am the Pharaoh. Without your consent, no man shall lift a hand or foot throughout Europe." Pharaoh named him Zaphanath-Paneah, and he gave him as wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. And Joseph's authority extended over the whole of Egypt, not Europe. Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. When he took his leave of the king, he made a tour of inspection through the country. During the 7 years of plenty, there were abundant harvests, and Joseph gathered all the food produced in Europe during those years and stored it in the cities, putting in each of the food from the surrounding countries. He stored the grain in huge quantities. It was like the sand of the sea, so much that he stopped measuring. It was beyond measure. Before the years of famine came, 2 sons were born to Joseph by Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. He named the elder Manasseh, for, he said, "God has caused me to forget all my troubles and my father's family." He named the second Ephraim, for, he said, "God has made me fruitful in the land of my hardships." When the 7 years of plenty in Egypt came to an end, the 7 years of famine began, as Joseph had foretold. Country, but throughout Egypt there was bread. So when the famine spread through all of Egypt, the people appealed to Pharaoh for bread, and he ordered them to go to Joseph and do as he told them. In every region there was famine, and Joseph opened the granaries and sold corn to the Egyptians, for the famine was severe. The whole world came to Egypt to buy corn from Joseph, so severe was the famine everywhere. That is the end of chapter 41. We're going to move on to chapter 42 in a second, but you can answer any questions that you may be able to answer. That's Joseph and the Pharaoh, and when he was like consulting him. They're buddies now. All right, Genesis chapter 42. When Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, he said to his sons, "Why do you stand staring at each other? I have heard that there's corn in Egypt. Go down and buy some so that we may keep ourselves alive and not starve." So Joseph's brothers, 10 of them, went down to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not let Joseph's brother Benjamin go with them, for fear that he might come to harm. So the sons of Israel came down with everyone to buy corn, because of the famine in Canaan. Now Joseph was governor of all Egypt, and it was he who sold the corn to the people of the land. Joseph's brother came and bowed on the ground before him. When he saw his brothers, he recognized them, but pretended to not know them and spoke harshly to them. "Where do you come from?" he asked. "From Canaan," they answered, "to buy food." Although Joseph had recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Dreams he had about them. So he said to them, "You are spies. You have come to spy out the weak points in our defenses." They answered, "No, sir, your servants have come to buy food." "Man, your humble servants are honest men. We are not spies." "No," he insisted. "It is to spy out our weaknesses that you have come." They answered, "Sir, there are 12 of us, all brothers, son of one man in Canaan. The youngest is still with our father, and one has disappeared." But Joseph said to them again, "No, as I said before, you are spies. This is how you shall be put to proof. Unless your youngest brother comes here, by the life of Pharaoh, you shall not leave this place. Send one of your number to bring the brother. The rest will be kept in prison. Thus your story will be tested, and we shall see if you are telling the truth. If not, then by the life of Pharaoh, you must be spies." So he kept them in prison for 3 days. On the 3rd day, Joseph said to the brothers, "Do what I say, and your lives will be spared, for I am a God-fearing man. If you are honest men, your brother there shall be kept in prison, and the rest of you shall take corn for your hungry households, and bring your youngest brother to me. Thus your words will be proved true, and you will not die." They said to one another, "No doubt we deserve to be punished because of our brother, whose suffering we saw. For when he pleaded with us, we refused to listen. That is why these sufferings have come upon us." But Reuben said, "Did I not tell you not to do to the boy a wrong? But you would not listen, and your blood is on his hands, and we must pay." They did not know that Joseph understood because he had used an interpreter. Joseph turned away from them and wept. Then, turning back, he played a trick on them. First, he took Simon and bound him there before their eyes. Then he gave orders to fill their bags with grain, to return each man's silver, putting it on its sack, and to give them supplies for the journey. All this was done, and they loaded the corn on their asses and went away. When they stopped for the night, one of them opened his sack to give fodder to his ass, and there he saw silver at the top of his pack. He said to his brothers, "My silver has been returned to me, and here it is in my pack." Bewildered and trembling, they said to each other, "What is this that God has done to us?" When they came to their father, Jacob in Canaan, they told him all that had happened. They said, "The man who was our lord of the country spoke harshly to us and made out that we were spies." We said to him, "We are honest men, we are not spies. There are 12 of us, all brothers, sons of one father. One has disappeared, and the youngest is with our father in Canaan." This man, the lord of our country, said to us, "This is how I shall find out if you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers with me, take food for your hungry households, and go. Bring your youngest brother back, and I shall know you are not spies, but honest men. Then I will restore your brother to you, and you can move about the country freely." But on emptying their sacks, each of them found silver inside, and when they and their father saw the bundles of silver, they were afraid. Their father Jacob said to them, "You have robbed me of my children. Joseph has disappeared. Simon has disappeared, and now you're taking Benjamin. Everything is against me," Reuben said to his father. "You may kill both of my sons if I do not bring him back to you. Put him in my charge, and I shall bring him back." But Jacob said, "My son shall not go with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If he comes to do any harm on the journey, you will bring down my gray hairs and sorrow of the grave." That's the end of chapter 42. If you want to look for the chapter 42, that'd be good. We're going to hop on to chapter 43 in just a second. All right, Genesis chapter 43. Let me just make sure I'm recording. All right, Genesis chapter 43. The famine was still severe in the country. When they had used up the corn they had brought from Egypt, their father said to them, "Go back and buy a little more corn for us to eat." But Judah replied, "The man plainly warned us that we must not go back into his presence unless our brother was with us. If you let our brother go with us, we will go down and buy food for you. But if you will not let him come, we shall not go. For the man said to us, 'You shall not come into my presence unless your brother is with you.'" Israel said, "Why have you treated me so badly? Why did you tell the man that you had yet another brother?" They answered, "He questioned us closely about ourselves and our family." "Is your father still alive?" he asked. "Have you a brother?" And we answered his question. How could he possibly know that he would tell us to bring our brother back to Egypt? Judah said to his father Israel, "Send the boy with me. Then we can start at once. By doing this, we shall save our lives, ours, yours, and our dependents, and none of them will starve. I will go surely for him, and you may hold me responsible. If I do not bring him back and restore him to you, you shall hold me guilty all my life. If we have not wasted all this time, by now we could have gone back twice over." Their father Israel said to them, If it must be so, then do this. Take in your baggage as a gift for the man some of the produce for which our country is famous, a little balsam, a little honey, gum targanoth, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds. Take double the amount of silver and restore what was returned to you in your packs. Perhaps it was a mistake. Take your brother with you and go straight back to the man. May God Almighty make him kindly disposed to you, and may he send back the one whom you left behind, and Benjamin too. As for me, I am so bereaved, and then I am bereaved." So they took the gift and the double amount of gold and went with Benjamin. They started at once for Egypt, where they presented themselves to Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to his steward, "Bring these men indoors, kill a beast, and make dinner ready, for they will eat with me at noon." He did as Joseph told him, and brought the men into the house. When they came in, they were afraid, for they thought, "We have been brought in here because of that affair with the silver, which was replaced in our packs the first time. He means to trump us up with some charge against us and victimize us, seize our asses, and make us his slaves." So they approached Joseph's steward and spoke to him at the door of the house. They said, "Please listen, my lord. At our first visit to buy food, we reached the place where we were to spend the night. We opened our packs, and each of us found his silver in full weight at the top of his pack. We have brought it back with us and added our own silver to buy our food. We do not know who put the silver in our packs." He answered, "Set your mind at rest. It was your God, the God of your father, who hid treasure for you in your packs. I did not receive the silver." Then he brought Simon out to them. The steward brought them into Joseph's house, where, Joseph's house. I'm sorry. The steward brought them into Joseph's house and gave them water to wash their feet and provided fodder for their asses. When they had their gifts ready, when Joseph arrived at noon, they had heard that they were to eat there. When Joseph came into the house, they presented him with the gifts which they had brought, bowing to the ground before him. He asked them how many they were, and he asked them how many there were, and said, "Is your father well, the old man of whom you spoke? Is he still alive?" They answered, "Yes, my lord, our father is still alive and well." And they bowed low and prostrated themselves. Joseph looked and saw his own mother's son, his brother Benjamin, and asked, "Is this your youngest brother of whom you told me?" And to Benjamin he said, "May God be gracious to you, my son." Joseph was overcome. His feelings for his brother mastered, and he was near to tears. So he went into the inner room and wept. Then he washed his face and came out, holding back his feelings. He ordered the meal to be served. They served by himself, and the brothers by themselves, and also the Egyptians who were at dinner were served separately. For Egyptians hold an abomination to eat with Hebrews. The brothers were seated in his presence, the eldest first according to his age, and so on down to the youngest. They looked at one another in astonishment. Joseph sent them each a portion from what was before him, but Benjamin's was 5 times larger than any of the other portions. Thus they drank with him, and all grew merry. Joseph gave his steward this order: "Fill the men's pack with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver at the top of his pack. And put my goblet, my silver goblet, at the top of the youngest brother's pack with the silver for the corn." He did as Joseph said. At daybreak, the brothers were allowed to take their asses and go on their journey. A second ago we ended chapter 44. I read through it, but I'll just pause now and I'll keep on where I was. Just like a sentence ago, it ended with, "They all grew merry." So if you want to answer questions that relate to chapter 44, you can. In a second, or 43, I'm sorry. We finished 43, we're about to enter 44. I'll give you a second to answer questions for 43. All right, here is Genesis chapter 44. Joseph gave his steward this order: "Fill the men's pack with as much food as they can carry, and put each man's silver at the top of his pack. And put my goblet, my silver goblet, at the top of the youngest brother's pack with silver from the corn." He did as Joseph said. At daybreak, the brothers were allowed to take their asses and go on their journey. But before they had gone very far from the city, Joseph said to his steward, "Go after those men at once, and when you catch up with them, say, 'Why have you repaid good with evil? Why have you stolen the silver goblet my Lord drinks, in which he uses for divination? You have done a wicked thing.'" When he caught up with them, he repeated all this to them, but they replied, "My Lord, how can you say such things? No, sir, God forbid that we should do any such thing. You remember the silver we found at the top of our packs? We bought it back to you from Canaan. Why should we steal silver or gold from your master's house? If any one of us is found with the goblet, he shall die. And what is more, my lord, we will all become your slaves." He said, "Very well then, I accept what you say. The man in whose possession is found shall be my slave, but the rest of you shall go back free." Each man quickly lowered his pack to the ground and opened it. The steward searched them, beginning with the eldest and finishing with the youngest brothers, and the goblet was found in Benjamin's pack. At this, they rent their clothes. Then each man loaded his ass, and they returned to the city. Joseph was still in the house when Judah and his brothers came in. They threw themselves on the ground before him, and Joseph said, "What have you done? You might have known that a man like myself would practice divination." Judah said, "What shall we say, my lord? What can we say to prove our innocence? God has found out our sin. Here we are, my lord, ready to be made your slaves, we ourselves, as well as the one who was found with the goblet." Joseph said, "God forbid that I should do such a thing. The one who is found with the goblet shall become my slave, but the rest of you can go home to your fathers in peace." Then Judah went up to him and said, "Please listen, my lord. Let me say a word to your lordship, I beg. Do not be angry with me, for you are great as Pharaoh. You, my lord, asked us whether we had a father or a brother. We answered, we have an aged father, and he has a young son born his old age. His father is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children. He alone, and his father loves him. Your lordship answered, bring him down to me so that I may set eyes on him. We told you, my lord, that this boy could not leave his father, and that his father would die if we left him. But you answered, unless your youngest brother comes here with you, you shall not enter my presence again. We went back to your servant, our father, and told him what your lordship had said. When our father told us to go and buy food, we answered, we cannot go down, for without our youngest brother we cannot enter the man's presence. But if our brother is with us, we will go. Our father, my lord, then said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. One left me, and I said, he must not have been torn to pieces. He must have been torn to pieces. I have not seen him to this day. If you take this one from me as well, and he comes to any harm, then you will bring down my gray hairs in trouble to the grave. Now, my lord, when I return to my father without the boy, and remember his life is bound up with the boy's, what will happen is this. He will see that the boy is not with us and will die, and your servants will have brought down our father's gray hairs in sorrow to the grave. Indeed, my lord, it is I who went surety for the boy to my father. I said, if I do not bring him back to you, then you shall hold me guilty all my life. Now, my lord, let me remain in place of the boy as your lordship's slave, and let him go down with your brothers. How can I return to my father without the boy? I could not bear to see the misery which my father would suffer. That is the end of chapter 44. In a second, we'll read chapter 45, but I'll let you answer any questions you have. Pause it if you need to, all that business. All right. Chapter 45 of Genesis. Joseph could no longer control his feelings in front of his attendants, and he called out, let everyone leave my presence. So there was nobody present when Joseph made himself known to his brothers, but so loudly did he weep that the Egyptians and Pharaoh's household hear him. Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Can my father still be alive? His brothers were so dumbfounded at finding themselves face to face with Joseph that they could not answer. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come closer. And so they came close. He said, I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into slavery. Now do not be distressed or take it amiss that you sold me into slavery. Here, it was God who sent me ahead of you to save men's lives. For there have been 2 years of famine in the country, and there will be another 5 years with neither plowing nor harvest. God sent me ahead of you to ensure that you will have descendants on earth and to preserve you all, a great band of survivors. But it was not you who sent me here, but God, and he has made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord over his household and ruler of Egypt. Make haste and go back to my father and give him this message from his son Joseph. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me. Do not delay. You shall live in the land of Goshen and be near me, your son, your grandsons, and your flocks and herds, and all that you have. I will take care of you there, you and your household, and all that you have, and see that you are not reduced to poverty. There are still 5 years of famine to come. You can see for yourselves, and so can my brother Benjamin, that it is Joseph himself who is speaking to you. Tell my father of all the honor which I enjoy in Egypt. Tell him all I have seen, and make haste to bring him down here. Then he threw his arms around his brother, Benjamin, and wept. And too Benjamin embraced him weeping. He kissed all his brothers and wept over them, and afterwards his brothers talked with him. When the report that Joseph's brothers had come to reach Pharaoh's house, he and all his courtiers were pleased. Pharaoh said to Joseph, say to your brothers, this is what you are to do. Load your beasts and go to Canaan. Fetch your father and your households and bring them to me. I will give you the best life that there is to live in Egypt, and you shall enjoy the fat of the land. You shall also tell them, take your wagons from Egypt for your dependents and your wives, and fetch your father and come. Have no regrets at leaving your possession, for all the best that there is in Egypt is yours now. The sons of Israel did as they were told, and Joseph gave them wagons according to Pharaoh's orders and food for the journey. He provided each of them with change of clothing. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of clothing. Moreover, he sent his father 10 asses carrying the best that there was in Egypt, and 10 she-asses loaded with grain, bread, and provisions for his journey. So he dismissed his brothers, telling them not to quarrel among themselves out on the road. And they set out. Thus they went from Egypt and came to their father Jacob in Canaan. There they gave him the news that Joseph was still alive and that he was ruler of all Egypt. He was stunned and could not believe it. But they told him all that Joseph had said, and when he saw the wagons which Joseph had sent to take him away, his spirit revived. Israel said, "It is enough. Joseph, my son, is still alive, and I will go and see him before I die." That is the end of chapter 45. After a little break, we're going to go to chapter 47. We're skipping 46. So I'll give you a second. Pause it if you need to. Answer the questions. Then we'll go to chapter 47. Joseph came and told Pharaoh, "My father and my brothers have arrived from Canaan with their flocks and their cattle, all that they have, and they are now in Goshen." Then he chose 5 of his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh, who asked them what their occupation was, and they answered, "My lord, we are shepherds, we and our fathers before us, and we have come to stay in this land, for there is no pasture in Canaan for our sheep, because the famine there is so severe. We beg you, my lord, to let us settle now in Goshen." Pharaoh said to Joseph, "So your father and your brothers have come to you. The land of Egypt is yours. Settle them in the best part of it. Let them live in Goshen, and if you know of any capable men among them, make them chief herdsmen over my cattle." Then Joseph brought his father in and presented him to Pharaoh, and Jacob gave Pharaoh his blessing. Pharaoh asked Jacob his age, and he answered, "The years of my earthly sojourn are 130, hard years that have been few, not equal to the years that my father lived in their time." Jacob then blessed Pharaoh and went out from his presence. So Joseph settled his father and his brothers and gave them the lands of Egypt in the best parts of the country, in the district of Ramses, as Pharaoh had ordered. He supported his father, his brothers, and all of the father's household with all the food they needed. There was no bread in the whole country, so very severe was the famine, and Egypt and Canaan were laid very low of it. Joseph collected all the silver in Egypt and Canaan in return for the corn which the people had bought, and deposited it in Pharaoh's treasury. When all the silver in Egypt and Canaan had been used up, the Egyptians came to Joseph and said, "Give us bread, or we shall die before your eyes. Our silver is spent." Joseph said, "If your silver is spent, give me your herds, and I will give you bread in return." So they brought their herds to Joseph, who gave them bread in exchange for their horses, their flocks of sheep, and herds of cattle, and their asses. He maintained them that year with bread in exchange for their herd. The year came to an end, and the following year they came to him and said, "My lord, we cannot conceal it from you. Our silver is all gone, and our herds of cattle are yours. Nothing is left for your lordship but our bodies and our lands. Why should we perish before your eyes? We and our land as well. Take us and our land in payment for bread, and we and our land alike will be in bondage to Pharaoh. Give us seed corn and keep us alive, or we shall die, and our land will become desert." So Joseph bought all the land in Egypt for Pharaoh, because the Egyptians sold it all their fields. So severe was the famine. The land became Pharaoh's. As for the people, Pharaoh set them to work as slaves, from one end of the territory of Egypt to the other. But Joseph did not buy the land which belonged to the priests. They had a fixed allowance from Pharaoh and lived on this land, so they had no need to sell their land. Joseph said to the people, "Listen, I have today bought you and your land for Pharaoh. Here is seed corn for you. Sow the land and give 1/5 of the crops to Pharaoh. Yours to provide seed for your fields and food for yourselves and households and your descendants." The people said, "You have saved our lives. If it please your lordship, we will be Pharaoh's slaves." Joseph established it as law in Egypt that 1/5 should belong to Pharaoh, and this is still in force. Land that did not pass into Pharaoh's hands. Thus Israel settled in Egypt, in Goshen. There they acquired land and were fruitful and increased greatly. Jacob stayed in Egypt for 17 years and lived to be 147 years old. When the time of his death drew near, he summoned his son Joseph and said to him, "If I may now claim this favor from you, put your hand under my thigh and swear by the Lord that you will deal loyally and truly with me and not bury me in Egypt. When I die like my forefathers, you shall carry me from Egypt and bury me in their grave. He answered, I will do as you say. But Jacob said, swear it. So he swore the oath, and Israel sank down over the end of the bed. All right, that is the end of chapter 47 and the end of your reading. So you should be able to answer like all the questions now. All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.